So thinking about ReMSTEP to begin with, what does it stand for? I was expecting the T and the E to stand for technology and engineering, as it is in the acronym STEM, finding out it is teacher education. And then the RE in front of the acronym stands for reconceptualization. Preparing for this talk and for this day, I've been trying to think what reconceptualization could be. I still really don't know what it means, but throughout the day and listening to the presentations, reading some of the PowerPoints that I received over the weekend to prepare, I began to think that maybe reconnecting is an appropriate term as well. Well, re can stand for a lot of re's, as you probably agree. To start with, oops, how does this work? Not this one. Oh my goodness, what did I do? Yeah. A quote that I have used in a couple of talks, but for this audience it may seem trivial, but still I think we put a lot of energy in introducing new content in science or math curricula, or creating new curricula which are more integrated. That's all fine, that's all important, and we saw some good examples today. I think we should not forget that the teacher is in the end the most, and this is decades, this is an older paper that I quote quite, I've quoted quite a few times. It's a seminal paper that was published like 12 years ago. A review of the literature keeps pointing out that teachers, more than curriculum materials or content or whatever, are very important when it comes to influencing students' attitudes towards science. And if we want students to be more engaged in science or STEM, then we should look at the teachers. And of course, that is what ReMSTEP is doing. ReMSTEP is focusing on teachers, on the new generation of teachers. Just before I'll go into a couple of things that I would like to say about the ReMSTEP program as I've heard about it today, put it in a little bit broader perspective. Of course, many countries struggle with a shortage of math and science teachers. In my country in particular, in the Netherlands, it's been a long, it's been for like 10 years a big issue, knowing that the teachers, the existing math and science teachers are a large majority is in their 50s and will leave the profession within 10 years. And the numbers of students, pre-service teachers that enroll in schools in math and science is just substantially lower. How is this possible? It's not in, there are countries where, of course, and we all know the examples of countries where people are really fighting to become a teacher. Economic factors do play an important role from the student's perspective. It may be different in Australia, we just heard the panel talking about, but in the Netherlands for graduates from science or math programs or engineering programs, the labor market has many jobs and many opportunities, and teaching is just one of them, and not always the most attractive for many graduates. Also, teacher education is in the Netherlands is a costly affair for students. It takes time, it takes an investment to become a teacher. And the salary of teachers compared to people in other STEM businesses, STEM jobs, is not always competitive. It's been improved, but it's still, especially if you look into career paths, then you see that after a number of years, people who work in industries have much higher salaries than teachers. Economic factors may not even be the most important for students, because if you're interested in teaching and if you really want to share your passion for science or engineering or math with young people, you might want to become a teacher. But other aspects are certainly maybe even more important, that it's the image of teaching that is problematic in many countries. Again, it's too early for me to tell whether that's the case in Australia, but in Netherlands and in many other European countries, teaching is seen as a job with a very high workload and a relatively low status, very limited career opportunities, and not much opportunities also for development. So it is seen, I mean, for people who are teaching, it may be perceived very differently. From the outside, from students who are studying in science or math, they may look at teachers like, well, that may not be the most exciting or the most interesting job to do. They see it as a dead-end street. I've had many discussions with science students who say, well, once a teacher, always a teacher. And I use this image, which I don't even know the English translation of this, but I guess you get the idea, with a paraphrasing the Brussels artist René Magritte. This is how many students talk about teaching as a job. Once you're in, you can never get out again. Whether that's true or not, I mean, these are perceptions of students that really play an important role in their decision to become a teacher or not. So what's the situation in the Netherlands? There's good news and bad news. Our government has spent quite a lot of money in making science or STEM more attractive to students. This beyond the scope of this talk to talk about all the initiative that has been taken in the last 15 years. Some of them were specifically targeted girls. Whatever they were, we have seen an increase of students, in particularly girls, taking up science in the upper years of secondary education, your VCE, so to speak. And also the enrollment in universities in science and particularly engineering has increased quite substantially. That's good news. Still, we see, if you look at if you break down in terms of gender, you see that girls are still largely underrepresented when it comes to math, physics, electrical engineering, the harder, not hard as in terms from difficult, but hard in terms compared to soft, still have percentages of up to maybe 15-20% of women. And the most urgent issue, as I already said in the beginning, is that there is this growing shortage of teachers, especially qualified teachers who are qualified to teach math and physics in the upper years of secondary education. So our government thought we need to take measures to make teacher education more attractive, because the idea is that teacher education may not be attractive to students. Universities have been encouraged to change the structure of the program. For instance, at universities, an educational minor was introduced as a sort of an elective or a breadth subject for science and math students that they spend one semester on, including a school placement, and that even when they finish their bachelor, earns them a qualification to teach in lower secondary education. All sorts of measures have been taken to increase the quality and the efficiency of teacher education. And at the same time, the government has come up with a few measures to make the participation in the teacher education programs a bit more attractive, giving scholarships for students who enroll in a science or math teacher education program, like 5,000 euros per year to make the financial barrier lower. Introducing traineeships, where is a kind of teacher education where you have already you have a job from day one. You're hired by a school even though you have not been teaching at all. You have not done your teacher education, so it's a form of training on the job to make it more authentic and that way more attractive. And there was our version of Teach for Australia, which we called Eerste Klas, or Teach First. It was based on the English version. Different from, I think, from what I've heard from Teach for Australia, this program aims at graduates with very high grades and prepares them for teaching, but also for they also offer management courses offered by big companies, so that at the end of the program, these people, when they graduate, have multiple job options. They can be teachers, but they can also go into other ways, which makes it attractive for some people, but it's also the big risk, of course, that they end up not going into teaching or leave teaching very quickly after 1 or 2 years. Talking with students again, they say, well, you can change teacher education as much as you want. You can make it longer, shorter, better, more authentic, whatever. It's not the point. You're missing the point. The point is that the profession itself needs to be more attractive. And our government has also understood that message. So you see now that there's a big investment in the last couple of years in induction programs. It was also just mentioned on the panel. We can try to attract as many people as we want into teacher education programs, but if 40 or 50% leave the profession within a number of years, we're not doing a good job. So investing in induction programs, programs that offer further professional development for beginning teachers, investing also in school leadership to make schools learning communities, not only for students but also for teachers, and offering all kinds of support for teacher development. For instance, and these are all rather generic measures, but there is also quite a big investment into setting up regional centers for science and math education, where universities work together with schools, and teachers are invited to do professional development, not so much in the traditional sense of courses, but working together with scientists. Some of the activities in the centers actually quite similar to what is going on in ReMSTEP, however, focusing on in-service rather than pre-service teachers. Okay, that's enough for the outside perspective. Looking at ReMSTEP then, and most of what I said, as you understand, is based on a very recent, so I can miss the point. I may have not seen things rightly. Please, if that's the case, correct me. What I see as two important foci of the ReMSTEP program is connecting and content. Connecting people in particular, pre-service teachers with scientists, that's fairly obvious, but also undergraduate students with in-service teachers in primary or secondary schools, teachers with science centers, collaborations between schools, universities, and other institutes. The Institute for, what was it, IFM was mentioned this morning as one example. I think that's a very important and comes up to me as a striking characteristic of ReMSTEP. The other thing, of course, is the focus on modern and recent content, discoveries, topics that are prominent, that are discussed in the news, where scientists are working on, and introduce them in science or in school curricula. And of course, that's not just content, that's also looking for developing appropriate pedagogies that would work well in primary and secondary schools. To me, these things stand out, and if you then look at the stakeholders that are involved in ReMSTEP activities, I think that it's clear that the pre-service teachers are the group that benefit most from the ReMSTEP program. And you could say, well, that should be obvious, because ReMSTEP is focusing on pre-service teachers more than on anybody else. What I've heard today and what I've seen so far is the pre-service teachers benefited from learning from what is going on in universities and in research centers at the moment, at the cutting edge of research in science and technology. They have learned also to incorporate this in teaching materials, working together with scientists, working together with school teachers, and they have developed and oftentimes tested innovative teaching approaches. The good old 5E model was mentioned a couple of times as a very good tool that helped beginning teachers, pre-service teachers, to develop the appropriate pedagogies. Also, there were some projects that reported about changes. All of this lead also to changes in student teachers' views of the nature of science. Another group that apparently benefited from participating in the ReMSTEP activities are the scientists and the engineers and the mathematicians that work together with pre-service teachers. Some of them reported that they have learned to communicate their research to a broader audience and also in different ways than they are used to, and that they've changed their views about teaching and learning. For many of them, participating in ReMSTEP apparently was like a more close-up encounter with what teaching and learning with young children actually entails. If you look at other groups that were also part of ReMSTEP, for me it was not always clear what their benefits were, if they benefited at all. I would expect and hope that in-service teachers, the people who mentor the pre-service teachers, would also benefit from the activities. In some projects I had the idea that in-service teachers were well connected with what was going on. In other projects it seemed that the in-service teachers were not so much part of the activities. I could imagine that many of the things that the pre-service teachers were learning in terms of the recent content from research could also be very relevant and also very interesting and exciting for in-service teachers. That may be the case, I'm just not sure. There were a couple of other projects, and I was in one of the presentations where undergraduate students were going to schools, primary and secondary schools, spend sometimes a day, sometimes a bit longer, to have a teaching experience. I was in a session where 4 of them reported very enthusiastically about their experiences. I found that seemed a very interesting and also potentially very good way to make students, undergraduate students, aware of what teaching is and try to find out whether teaching may be something for them. Clearly also it helped us to develop our skills, communicating skills, but also organizational skills. And some of them actually begin to consider teaching as a possible career path. Another group that I would guess is involved in ReMSTEP, but I did not hear much about teacher educators. Again, it could be my blind spot, but I would expect that teacher educators can also benefit in all sorts of ways from participating in the activities. I guess that there are, and this is something I've heard, that this project helped to build better relationships between schools of education and science or engineering faculties. I think that's good news. But I didn't hear so much about how teacher educators actually benefited from participation in the program. And if ReMSTEP stands for reconceptualizing teacher education programs, I think teacher educators should play a very prominent role in that. And now, of course, in the end, our efforts are aimed at students. And of course, ReMSTEP is not about students. That's fair enough. I think we should still, I would still want to know more, like whatever was conducted in classrooms in terms of teaching new content with innovative pedagogies, how did that impact on students? The messages that I get all the time is students need to be more engaged in science or in maths. Maybe that's why STEM integrated STEM is a better way to attract students' interest, to make them engaged, to make science and math more relevant to students. Clearly that is what you want to see. Again, ReMSTEP is not about that, but you would want to see that the experiments or the activities that were carried out actually spoke to students. And to bring about change in schools and in education in general is, of course, you cannot only aim at teachers and students. It was acknowledged in the panel too. School leaders, parents, they all play a major role in the way that students perceive science and math education. I remember a study presented in the conference in Geelong where a review was given of the research on the attitudes of girls towards science and how teachers are able to change attitudes of young girls. But when it actually comes to changing career decisions, parents and school advisors and other people have a very important role to play. And of course, again, this is beyond ReMSTEP, but it's certainly something that we should keep in mind. A few issues that some of them already mentioned, and the first one was also a part of the panel just here. Many people have tried in the past all over the world to change education through teacher education, and in almost every case that I know and all the research that has not been very successful, and we understand why, because you can have very enthusiastic and innovative pre-service teachers entering schools, but if they are not welcomed in an environment that is open to change and that is supporting of these young beginning teachers, typically they adapt to the situation, and that can be very traditional, or they opt out, and maybe that's one reason why many young teachers leave the profession. I think it is a really great idea to introduce new and cutting-edge research content in schools. At the same time, there are, of course, limits to what young kids can learn and what can be taught at younger levels of education. Also, there are limits to what you can include. It should not be completely alien to the curriculum, because in the end, at some point, especially in this country, by the time the kids get to the VCE, that content dominates what they want to learn, what they are interested to learn. So things that are completely alien to that may also not be very successful. The pedagogies that are introduced are also crucial, of course. I've heard a few examples of people who are really very excited about and very interested and very enthusiastic about teaching content, especially if you let scientists or undergraduate students talk to kids about their the latest research. But enthusiasm, although important, is clearly not enough, and actually can also work in the wrong way. We all know examples where a scientist gets very excited and very enthusiastic, but maybe 1 or 2 kids in the class actually get it and respond to that, and the rest is pulls out. So there's some really tricky issues to deal with. ReMSTEP reaches its end. I was hoping to hear today from somebody from some government to say, well, you know, there's a new amount of money was found, and we'll have ReMSTEP 2, and it's not just ReMSTEP, there are other initiatives in other states in Australia. Haven't heard that today yet, but maybe I'm not informed. Whatever is done, of course, is always the issue at the end of a project. Things, and specifically this project, which aims so clearly at connecting people, at building communities, and I would say reconnecting is an appropriate term, because it is the reconnection of people from science, people from industries, people from schools, and people from schools of education. I think it's really important. I am a strong believer in the power of those communities, but they need to be sustained and they need to be fostered. I heard David Hoxley saying this morning, scientists and teachers, although they're very busy, they always have time to spare to do things that they think are really important. They don't count the time. But they need, for instance, administrative support, because if that's not there, they will probably, they won't take that job on them. And if that's lacking, things may fall apart pretty quickly. And that would be, of course, a waste of everybody's energy. I think things like that really need time. This has been 3 years. I think you need to continue this for a number of years and actually continue to foster the communities that have been built. Also, I would say, I already mentioned the importance of involving in-service teachers. I think the sort of things that you do in ReMSTEP can very well be done including in-service teachers. In the Netherlands, one of the big successes, after most in-service teachers were not happy with the traditional PD that was offered to them, is that they work now in what is called professional learner communities. And this is exactly what they do. They work with teachers from different schools, they work with scientists, they develop new curriculum materials for science or for history for that matter. It's funded by the government. It's the first time in my career that I hear in-service teachers talking really enthusiastic about what PD in a different way can be. And it's actually not very different from what you're doing in ReMSTEP. Also, of course, we need long-term research, and I'm guessing that Steve will talk about that in a little while after I'm finished. Of course, you need to follow a project like this up with research. The impact that I was talking about was basically my impressions, and I hope there's more data, and I know that there are data being collected to see what the impact really is on the different stakeholders in the project. In the end, I hope that this project will benefit, that students in schools will benefit more from it than anybody else, and that it will contribute to their confidence and competence in STEM. Thank you very much.